The factory the world chose is running out of electricity. How Vietnam's power grid became the biggest threat to its own success. Act 1. The spark. What happens when the factory the world chose suddenly loses its spark? For the last 5 years, the narrative surrounding global manufacturing has been remarkably singular. Multinationals looking to diversify away from China looked south, saw Vietnam, and staked hundreds of billions of dollars on its industrial zones. It was the undisputed winner of the China Plus One strategy. But factories do not run on ambition. They run on electricity. And right now, Vietnam's power grid is being pushed to its absolute breaking point by the very success it worked so hard to attract. To understand what that breaking point looks like, cast your mind back to the northern summer of 2023. A shift supervisor named Lin arrives at the plant gate in Bach Ninh province at 6 o'clock on a humid morning, ready to oversee a line producing high-end electronics destined for markets in Europe and North America. But by 9 o'clock, the notice arrives from the state utility provider. A rotational power cut is scheduled. Industrial parks across northern Vietnam are being forced to ration power, and just like that, Ling's assembly line goes dark. The export orders do not wait. The global supply chain does not pause, but the machines are silent. That crisis sent a shiver through every boardroom that had bet on Vietnam. And today in 2026, Hanoi is doing everything in its power to make sure it never happens again. The question is whether that is enough. That is the official story of a surging economy learning from a near miss. The real one is far more complicated, structural, and expensive. Act 2. The foundation. To understand how Vietnam became so vital to the global economy and why this energy challenge matters far beyond its borders, you have to look at the sheer scale of the industrial migration that occurred over the last decade. When global trade tensions and supply chain vulnerabilities forced multinational corporations to look for alternative production bases, Vietnam positioned itself perfectly. It offered a disciplined workforce, competitive costs, and a government deeply committed to rolling out the red carpet for foreign direct investment. The strategy worked spectacularly. Northern industrial corridors rapidly filled with sprawling manufacturing ecosystems producing everything from smartphones to semiconductors. The momentum has not slowed down. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, Vietnam's manufacturing and processing sectors attracted over $9.2 billion in foreign direct investment. That represents a staggering 60.8% of the country's total registered capital for the quarter. On paper, the economic bet looked unassailable. Vietnam was locking in its position as an indispensable node in global technology hardware. But look closer at those sprawling industrial parks in Bac Ninh or neighboring Bac Giang, and you find a parallel reality. A modern semiconductor or precision electronics facility is not just a building. It is a highly sensitive ecosystem. Facilities run by Samsung SDI and Samsung Display, both anchored in the Yen Phong industrial zone, alongside dozens of precision component suppliers, require a continuous hyperstable supply of electricity. Even a momentary micro-fluctuation in voltage can ruin entire batches of precision components, destroy delicate silicon wafers, and cause millions of dollars in equipment damage. When the 2023 blackouts forced factory managers across BRC Ninh and BRC Giang to halt production, the consequence landed instantly on the people inside. For supervisors like Lin, it meant frantic rescheduling, missed targets, and the stress of explaining to global headquarters why a shipment was delayed. For the hourly workers on the line, it meant lost overtime wages and sudden shift cancellations. The macroeconomic data point of $9.2 billion in investment sounds triumphant. But on the factory floor, the reality of a fragile power grid is measured in lost time, damaged product, and human anxiety. Act 3. The money or incentive question. The core of the problem is straightforward. Vietnam's industrial engine has grown at a pace that its infrastructure was never designed to support. At the center of this tension is the state-owned electricity monopoly, Vietnam Electricity, known as EVN, pronounced as 3 individual letters, EVN. For years, EVN has faced a brutal financial balancing act. It is tasked with keeping electricity tariffs low for consumers and attractive for foreign factories, while simultaneously funding the massive capital expenditure required to modernize the national grid. The numbers simply did not add up. As a result, EVN repeatedly postponed critical investments in upgrading transmission lines and expanding generation capacity. Official surveys show that these investment delays between 2021 and 2023 directly triggered the 2023 supply crisis. The true cost of that underinvestment became painfully visible when the 2023 crisis caused an estimated $1.4 billion in economic damages. The political fallout was severe enough that EVN has since declared stable electricity supply a quote, key political task and top priority for 2026. The government confirmed in April of this year that supply has been fully maintained through the first quarter, and national output is projected at roughly 350 billion kilowatt hours for the full year, up nearly 8% on the previous year. EVN has set a 3% national consumption reduction target and is pushing hard on conservation, demand-side management, and rooftop solar to keep the system from tipping. That sounds reassuring, but the structural pressure has not gone away. It has simply been managed for now. Now, in 2026, a dangerous new layer of pressure has arrived from outside Southeast Asia. The ongoing conflict in the Strait of Hormuz has sent global energy markets into a tailspin, disrupting fuel supplies and driving up utility costs across the globe. Just last week, we tracked how this exact external shock crippled the livelihoods of long-tail boat operators and tourism businesses in southern Thailand by driving fuel costs through the roof. Today, that identical geopolitical shockwave is hitting Vietnam's industrial engine. Since February of 2026, gasoline prices in Vietnam have surged by 50%, while diesel prices have jumped by 70%. This is a direct hit to the manufacturing sector's emergency backup plan. When the grid is stressed, factories rely on massive industrial-scale diesel generators to keep their clean rooms and assembly lines alive. But with diesel costs up 70%, running a factory on backup generators is no longer just an operational headache, it is a financial hemorrhage. Act 4. The consequence chain. As electricity demand is projected to grow by an aggressive 12 to 15% annually from 2026 through 2030, Vietnam finds itself navigating between two entirely different futures. In the optimistic chain, the government breaks the regulatory logjam that is currently paralyzing the energy sector. Right now, more than 170 renewable energy projects, primarily wind and solar installations built by private investors, are sitting idle, entangled in bureaucratic pricing disputes and grid connection hurdles. If the state can streamline approvals, modernize its transmission architecture, and integrate this green capacity, it can stabilize the grid on a lasting structural basis. In this scenario, Vietnam retains its manufacturing crown, multinationals feel secure expanding their footprints, and workers enjoy stable, high-quality manufacturing jobs in a modernizing economy. But the adverse consequence chain is already visible and the margin for error is razor-thin. EVN's own planning scenarios acknowledge that peak demand during the dry season could push the system close to its limits even with every mitigation measure in place. The government's confidence is real, but it is confidence built on a very tight operating plan. If structural shortages return, the cascade of consequences will move rapidly from the factory floor to the global boardroom. Foreign investors are highly sensitive to utility reliability. If Vietnam cannot guarantee a stable current of electricity, the China plus one capital will not stop flowing. It will simply change direction. Competitors like India and Mexico are watching closely, actively pitching themselves as alternatives with more secure domestic energy supplies. For Vietnam, losing that momentum does not just mean empty industrial parks. It means a sudden slowdown in the economic engine that is lifting millions of its citizens into the middle class. Act 5. The deeper implication. This energy story reveals a fundamental truth about the current era of rapid economic realignment. Winning the geopolitical lottery is only half the battle. Vietnam sets its sights on an ambitious average annual gross domestic product growth rate of at least 10% from 2026 to 2030, viewing it as the essential runway to achieve high-income status by 2045. It is a bold, inspiring vision for national development. The fact that Hanoi has declared stable power supply a political priority, not just an infrastructure target, tells you exactly how seriously they understand the risk. They know that another 2023 would not just damage the economy, it would damage the story. The deeper question facing the region is structural. Can any emerging ASEAN economy truly sustain a massive, rapid manufacturing ascent when its infrastructure investment historically lags behind its geopolitical ambition? Vietnam is not unique in facing this challenge, but it is currently the most exposed because it has successfully attracted the most global capital and therefore has the most to lose. Building world-class factories is relatively fast. Building a stable, resilient national power grid takes decades. As the shift ends in BAC hence and the evening lights flicker across Hanoi, the machines stand as a reminder that the modern world is only as reliable as the current running through it. The factory of the world is ready to build the future, provided the power stays on.